Earth's scrapped colony ship had been dormant for centuries. The Empire's fleet never came back. The reclassification notice arrived on a Tuesday, 9 seconds before Vorath Sane, Dihal finished his first glass of water. He did not notice the 9 seconds. He never noticed anything about the endurance file until the moment he closed it, and even then only because the system flagged it as an anomaly in his pending queue, not a legal anomaly, not a disputed claim. An administrative delay old as his grandfather's service record, clogging the smooth flow of his morning batch. He set the glass down, he pulled the file up. The vessel's name was printed at the top of the form in plain block text: Endurance, Human Registry, Contested Rim Sector 14 Delta, filed 214 years ago. Below the name in the small grey font reserved for status summaries, the system had printed: no response received from filing civilization, no representative contact, no active claim renewal. Administrative processing recommended. Dihal's finger tapped once against the secondary glass display, then twice. A slow mechanical rhythm, the way a man taps when he is waiting for something boring to finish. He scrolled to the bottom of the file. The vessel had gone dark 2 centuries ago somewhere in the rim. There had been one human protest, logged officially and immediately filed in the unanswered queue. After that, nothing, no follow-up, no legal representative, not a single transmission from Earth in 214 years. The system note at the bottom of the form read: qualifying period for civilizational forfeiture of abandoned sovereign property, satisfied in full. Dihal appended his authorization key without reading the note again. The reclassification took 4 seconds. He barely felt its status changed from active sovereign flag to abandoned salvage, no recognized claim. The vessel was now the property of the Compact's asset network, to be stripped, logged, and distributed across the appropriate salvage registers. Dihal cleared the file from his active queue and reached for his water glass. He sent the courtesy notice without looking up. The automated system generated it, as it always did, filling in the standardized language from the template. He only edited one line, the sign-off, which he preferred to write himself because the template's language was, in his private opinion, too gentle. He typed it quickly, the way a man writes something he has written many times before. We acknowledge no Earth claim. The vessel predates any civilization Earth could now credibly call its own. This notice is provided as professional courtesy. No response is required or expected. He sent it at 07:43 Compact Standard Time. By 07:44, the file was gone from his queue, and his screen showed the next pending item. Dihal had already forgotten the name of the vessel. Somewhere in the outer relay chain, the courtesy notice found the right antenna. It crossed 3 empty sectors, slowed through the rim's dead zone, and dropped into Earth's outer administrative buffer at 11:19 local station time, flagged as low-priority correspondence. The relay's automated sorter scanned the message header, registered the sender code as an Arathi Compact filing bureau, and routed it to the secondary archive inbox, a queue that Earth's outer relay had not manually checked in 6 years. The message sat there, unread. You may want to hear how this ends. I'll be honest, what happened next took 214 years to build, and it took 4 seconds to arrive. Stay close. Councillor Resh of the Vale Observers had been watching the Arathi Compact's filing queue for 11 years. Not because the Compact was interesting, it was, in her professional assessment, the least interesting of the major powers, since empires that ruled entirely through paperwork rarely gave her anything worth archiving. She watched them because they were methodical, and methodical powers left clean data trails, and clean data trails were the only kind she trusted. She pulled the endurance reclassification from the broadcast log at 08:02, 17 minutes after Dihal sent it. She opened the full institutional file on Earth. It was thin, surprisingly thin for a species that had been registered in the galactic record for as long as they had. 1 original sovereign filing, 1 protest logged and ignored, then 2 centuries of absolute quiet. Resh read the Compact's doctrine note at the bottom of Earth's institutional record. She had read it before. All empires had some version of it, though the Compact's was older than most. Under continuous Arathi legal precedent, the absence of active sovereign engagement by registered developmental species across a period exceeding 100 standard years shall constitute voluntary and permanent forfeiture of all contested property rights. Silence is recognized as legal surrender. No further process is required. She set her stylus down. She looked at Earth's file for a long time. The thing that bothered her, the thing she could not quite assign to a category, was the shape of the silence. The Compact had records on dozens of species that had gone quiet after a reclassification notice. They went quiet the way things went quiet when they were beaten. Sporadic transmissions, a trailing off, a few final administrative messages, and then nothing. Earth's silence was not that shape. Earth's silence had begun before the reclassification. It had begun before the notice. It had begun, as far as Resh could determine, exactly 48 hours after the original protest was filed and ignored 214 years ago, and then it had simply stayed. No trailing off, no final transmissions, no grief visible in the data. Just a hard, clean stop, like a door closing from the inside. Resh flagged the record for secondary review and moved on. She had 47 other files to monitor. The basement office on Earth had no windows. This was officially a ventilation issue. The archive chamber had been built below grade in the directory's original construction, and no one had ever bothered to retrofit it with exterior exposure. In practice, it meant that Dr. Amara Osai had spent 14 years working in a space lit entirely by the pale glow of a single terminal screen and two old fluorescent bar lights that hummed at slightly different frequencies. She had stopped noticing the hum years ago. The room smelled of paper, old paper, the kind that goes dry and faintly sweet when it has been sealed long enough, and of the low-grade ozone that large cooling rigs produce when they run continuously. Both smells were so familiar that Osai registered them only when she stepped out of the room and back in again, and even then only for a second or two. On her desk beside the terminal sat a photograph in a dark walnut frame, 42 faces arranged in 4 rows taken on the launch deck of the Endurance 2 centuries ago. The people in the photograph had neat clothing and careful smiles, the kind people wear when they know the image is for the record. In the 3rd row, second from the left, a woman with short, natural hair looked slightly past the camera, as though she had heard something just outside the frame. Osa had stopped looking at the photograph consciously about 6 years in. It was just there, the way the hum was just there, the way the smell of old paper was just there. Her terminal ran a single program. It monitored a specific node in the Arathi Compact's outer salvage compliance network, not intrusively, not actively, in a way that would register on any standard security sweep. It watched, it waited. It had been waiting for 14 years, and before that it had been waiting for 200 more, installed by a woman who was now a face in the 3rd row of a photograph. The program had one output, a single notification tone, soft and low, programmed by someone who understood that the person receiving it might need a moment before they acted. At 11:23 local station time on a Tuesday, the terminal chimed. Osai looked up from the cold coffee she had been nursing for the past hour. She set the cup down on the desk with the deliberate care of someone making sure it is exactly where she can find it again. She looked at the screen. The display showed 3 lines. Trigger condition active. ARATHI Compact Sector 14. Reclassification key transmitted. Meridian standing by, awaiting execution authorization. She read all 3 lines twice. Then she opened the archival log, the one she had spent 14 years studying, the one Dr. Yemi Aser had compiled in the final 6 months before the Endurance went dark. The log was stored in a directory that had never been indexed, on a physical drive that had never been connected to any network except this one. It smelled like the rest of the room when she slid it out of its sleeve. The log's last entry was a short audio file. 43 seconds. Osa had listened to it so many times she could play it without pressing anything, just by closing her eyes. I filed it, the recording said, in a voice that was steady and a little dry, the way voices get when they have been speaking into a recorder for a long time. Someone will know. The architecture holds. When it activates, be calm. The whole thing is designed to be calm. A pause, the faint sound of cooling systems in a ship's hull. Be calm, the recording said again, and then it ended. Osa exhaled once. She pulled her keyboard to the center of the desk and typed the execution command, a short string, 9 characters, nothing that looked like what it was. She pressed the key. The cursor blinked once. On her terminal, a new line appeared beneath the 3 she had read before. Meridian, active. She did not move for a long moment. Her hands were on the desk, flat still. The fluorescent lights hummed at their 2 slightly different frequencies. The terminal screen was the only light in the room that was different from how it had always been. She picked up her coffee, found it completely cold, and drank it anyway. The archival log had 312 entries. Osai had read all of them. She had read the first one 14 years ago, the night she was assigned to the basement office, assigned because no one else wanted it, because the project had no budget and no official status and no expected outcome, and because her director had been looking for somewhere to put a systems linguist who kept asking questions about a colony ship that had been administratively dead for 2 centuries. She had read the last entry the same night. Then she had started again from the beginning. The entries were dated across 6 months, all of them filed from the same ship-based terminal, the Endurance's systems bay, deep in the vessel's lower hull where the cooling systems ran loudest. Aser had written them the way engineers write when they know no one is reading, dense, exact, without preamble. No greetings, no sign-offs, just the work. The first entry was dated 6 days after the Compact sent back Earth's protest, without acknowledgement. Network credential packet from the compact Sector 14 border registration still valid. Standard expiry is 400 standard days. This gives us a window. A pause in the typing rhythm. I could tell by the spacing of the timestamps. I am going to use the window. 2 centuries earlier, Yemi Aser had not told anyone what she was going to use it for. She had not told the captain. She had not told the 12 crew members who shared the Endurance's common spaces with her. She had worked at night, ship time, in the lower hull where the cooling systems were loud enough to cover the sound of a keyboard, with the lights at minimum and a thermal wrap around her shoulders because the bay ran cold. The compact's border registration had given them a credential packet, standard procedure for vessels passing through the administrative zone. The packet contained authentication keys that allowed the Endurance to interface with the compact's salvage compliance network for the standard processing period. It was routine. Every registered vessel got one. The compact issued them automatically, the way a customs post issues a transit stamp, mechanically, without attention, and without imagining that anyone would do anything with it except let it expire. Aser had not let it expire. She spent the first month learning the network's architecture, not attacking it. She was very clear about this in her log entries, methodical the way people are when they know they are writing for someone who comes later. I'm not breaking in, I'm using the door they left open. The credential keys authenticate internally. The network treats any packet signed with them as a native process. This means anything I write into the system from inside will be treated as a system document, not an intrusion. The second month, she designed the counterclaim. It was not a weapon. It had no payload that would damage anything, overload anything, or erase anything. What it had was a single authenticated sovereign document, a formal legal claim on the Endurance under the compact's own procedural law, filed from inside their own system, signed with their own keys, timestamped at a point 200 years in the past. The compact's law was very clear about priority. Older claims superseded newer ones. A claim filed 2 centuries ago superseded a reclassification filed this morning. And because the claim was authenticated by the compact's own credential system, their internal protocols would treat it as native, not as an attack, as a document. The law is the weapon, she wrote in month 3. I am not arguing with their law, I am using it. The third month, she embedded it. This was the slow work, the quiet work, the kind of work that Osai had spent 14 years decoding and verifying and running test strings against dead simulations that could not hurt anything. Aser built the payload in small pieces, hiding each piece inside routine network maintenance packets that the compact's automated system generated on a regular basis. She would sit in the lower hull for 6, 7, 8 hours at a stretch, writing code strings that looked like scheduled garbage collection, like minor database integrity checks, like the kind of background maintenance that no administrator ever looked at because it was too boring and too frequent, and had never in the network's long history been anything other than exactly what it appeared to be. Each piece alone was meaningless. Together, assembled in sequence by the Dormant activator she had threaded into the system's core scheduler, they formed Meridian. She called it that in month 4, in entry 187. I am calling the architecture Meridian, she wrote, because a meridian is a reference line. It doesn't move. It's just there permanently until you need it. Osai knew entry 187 by heart. She had read it so many times that the words had lost their individual weight and become something more like rhythm, the cadence of a person working alone in a cold room, doing something no one had asked her to do, in the quiet certainty that it mattered. What she had not known for the first 8 years was whether it would work. The problem was verification. Aser had designed Meridian to be undetectable, which meant there was no way to check whether it was still intact without activating it, and activating it prematurely without the exact trigger condition would expose the payload and give the compact time to respond. So Osai could not test it. She could only study the design and trust the architect. She had spent 3 years just on the credential key problem. Standard compact credentials expired in 400 days. Aser had embedded Meridian 2 centuries ago on a packet that should have been dead within the year. But Aser had anticipated this. The payload carried its own internal clock, not a countdown but an anchor. It used the original timestamp as a static reference point and re-authenticated itself against the network's own historical records every time the automated system ran its yearly database consistency sweep. Because the original timestamp predated any revocation event, the system kept confirming the credentials as valid. It was the bureaucratic equivalent of a door that relocked itself every time someone checked whether it was locked. The compact had swept their database every year for 200 years, and confirmed the claim was in good standing every time, without ever reading what they were confirming. By year 11, Osai had satisfied herself the design was sound. By year 13, she had run every simulation she could run without network access. By year 14, she was just waiting. She had told no one. On the day the terminal chimed, Osai had been alone in the building for 3 hours. The directory's upper floors were running on weekend staff. The cleaning crew had finished at 9. The fluorescent lights in the basement hummed at their 2 frequencies, and the terminal screen was the only thing that had changed in the room since she had arrived at 7:30. She had not called anyone when the trigger fired. She had not filed a report. She had not opened a secure line to her director or to Earth's outer relay, or to anyone whose job description would normally include being informed about the activation of a legal intelligence architecture inside a foreign empire's network. She had typed 9 characters and pressed enter. In the Compact's salvage compliance network, 214 years of patient dormancy ended without a sound. Meridian assembled itself from its scattered pieces in the time it takes a database to run a routine query, 4.2 seconds, according to the log timestamp Osai would check later. It authenticated against the system's own historical records. It confirmed the trigger condition. It loaded the sovereign counterclaim into the active filing queue with a priority flag that the system's own protocols placed above every other pending process. And then it waited, the way it had been designed to wait, for the moment the queue ran. The queue ran at 09:14 Compact Standard Time every morning. In Sector 14, D. Hal was eating breakfast. It was a small thing, a compressed grain disk he kept in a drawer because he found it inefficient to leave the filing bay for the mid-morning break most of his colleagues took. He ate it in 3 neat bites while reviewing the next batch of pending reclassifications. He was not thinking about the Endurance. He had not thought about the Endurance since 0744. His secondary display, the translucent one he used for reference documents and institutional cross-checks, flickered once. He glanced at it. The screen showed the standard morning queue processing notification, running 0914 scheduled compliance review, and then went white. Not dimmed, not flickered, a white. D. Hal set down the remainder of his grain disk. He tapped the screen twice with one finger, the way people tap on things that have never failed before. The screen stayed white. Then text appeared, clean, formatted the way official documents appeared on his terminal every day of his working life. The header read, Priority Sovereign Claim Active Review Required Authentication Code, Compact Registry Origin. Below it the claim itself, the Endurance, the original filing date, the authentication keys that the system had according to its own records confirmed as valid every year for 2 centuries. D. Hal read the filing date, he read it again. He reached for his override panel and keyed the hard administrative bypass, a command he had used exactly once before in 14 years of service, during a system error that had temporarily misflagged 300 vessels simultaneously. The terminal accepted his input, displayed the processing indicator for 2 seconds, and then displayed a text notification in the same clean official font. Active sovereign counterclaims cannot be minimized or altered during the mandatory registry review period. He keyed the bypass again. The same notification appeared. His secondary glass display, the one that had gone white, was showing the claim on full screen. The authentication stamp at the bottom glowed in the pale amber the system used for documents of verified origin. His supervisor called. He answered. My terminal is. I know, his supervisor said. The man's voice had a quality D. Hal had not heard in it before. Mine is the same. I'm looking at a human claim document that appears to have been filed inside our own system 214 years ago. D. Hal looked at the amber authentication stamp. That is not possible, D. Hal said. His supervisor did not answer immediately. When he did, his voice was very level, the way voices get when someone is working very hard to keep them that way. The director of salvage compliance is on the line. She is confirming the same document is displayed across all 14 sector mainframes simultaneously. D. Hal looked at his grain disk. He did not pick it up again. The director of salvage compliance was a woman named Arath Vorselan, and she had held the position for 31 years without once having to use the emergency protocol line. She used it now. All 14, she said, and her voice carried the specific flatness of someone who has repeated a number enough times in the last 4 minutes that it has stopped feeling real. Every sector mainframe, the same document on every screen. D. Hal listened to the line. He could hear behind her voice the sound of other people in her office, quick footsteps, a terminal being keyed, someone asking a question in a low, urgent tone that was trying not to sound urgent. What is the authentication source? He asked. That is the problem. A pause. The authentication source is us. The keys are ours. The system is reading the claim as an internally generated document. D. Hal looked at the amber stamp on his screen. He had seen that stamp 10,000 times in 14 years of service. It was the stamp the system placed on documents that it had verified as genuine. That is not possible, he said again. I know, Arith Vorselen said. Find me something that is passable, Arbiter. She ended the call. Dihal stared at the stamp. The stamp stared back. 3 floors above Dihal's filing bay, in the Compact's Administrative Archive Annex, a junior record keeper named Sova Vel pulled up the Endurance's full historical file for the first time since the reclassification had been logged. She was looking for the original credential packet, the border registration issued when the vessel first entered the administrative zone, 2 centuries ago. She found it in 4 minutes. The packet was exactly where it should be, archived in the standard credential log, filed under the vessel's registration number, marked as expired after 400 standard days. Marked as expired. But the system's own yearly consistency sweeps, she pulled the log, counting back, had flagged the credential as confirmed valid every year without exception, for 214 years. Sova Vel looked at the log for a long moment, then she printed it, because she suddenly felt that she wanted a physical copy of something, and walked it down to her supervisor's office without being asked. On Earth, Osai had made a fresh cup of coffee. The process had taken 4 minutes, boiling the water, measuring the grounds, waiting. She did it the same way she did it every morning, with the same attention she gave everything in the basement office, deliberate, unhurried, precise. The terminal screen still showed the Meridian active notification. She had not touched the keyboard since the execution command. She sat down, set the cup to the right of the keyboard where it always went, and opened a new text interface. The message she composed was short. She had been composing it in her head for 14 years. She did not use a diplomatic frequency. She did not route it through Earth's outer relay or through any channel that would require authorization codes or transmission logs or the involvement of anyone who did not already know what she was doing. She routed it through the Compact's own internal text system, the same administrative interface Dihal used to send interdepartmental memos, using a narrow routing credential that Acer had embedded alongside Meridian for exactly this purpose. It arrived on Dihal's locked terminal as a procedural addendum to Filing 14. The header identified the sender as Earth Administrative Directory Systems Archive Reference Endurance Sovereign Status. The message read: Meridian will return to dormancy upon confirmation of the vessel's restored sovereign status in the galactic record. No further action is required from Earth. No further action will be taken by Meridian. The claim is specific. The architecture will not exceed the claim. Compliance window, 72 hours from time of receipt. Dihal read it twice. He read the line about dormancy. He read the line about no further action from Earth. He read the compliance window. Then he read the line he kept returning to, the one that felt like a door handle that turned but opened onto nothing. The architecture will not exceed the claim. It did not say there is only one Meridian. It did not say we have deployed nothing else. It said only that this one specific payload would do exactly what it stated it would do and nothing more. The space around that statement was very large. Dihal forwarded the message to Arith Vorselen without adding a word. The message reached Arith Vorselen at 0931. By 0945 she had forwarded it to the High Directorate's duty officer with a cover note that contained, in its entirety, the sentence, "Please advise on appropriate response." By 10:00, the High Directorate's legal division had pulled every existing record on Earth. The file remained thin, one protest 2 centuries old, 214 years of silence, and now this, a 7-sentence message routed through their own internal system, using their own interface, telling them in perfectly standard administrative language what would happen if they complied and saying nothing at all about what would happen if they did not. The legal division spent 2 hours looking for a technical pathway around the priority protocol. They found 3 candidates. All 3 failed the same test. The Compact's own procedural law, the same law they had used to reclassify the vessel, gave authenticated priority claims precedence over administrative override attempts. The law did not have an exception for claims that had been filed from inside the system using the system's own keys. It had not needed one before. At 12:07, the lead counsel drafted a note to the High Directorate that read, in part, "The human payload has not technically done anything illegal under current Compact law. It has filed a document. The document is valid. The protocol blocking our override is our own protocol operating correctly. We are being outprocessed by our own procedures." The note was marked confidential. It was filed in the restricted archive. 2 floors away, Councillor Resch of the Vale Observers, who had a source inside the restricted archive, read it at 12:14. Resch set down her stylus. She pulled up Earth's file again. The thin file, the one with 1 protest and 2 centuries of silence. She read Dihal's courtesy notice from that morning, "No response is required or expected," and then she read the 7-sentence reply that had arrived through the Compact's own text system 3 hours later. She thought about the shape of the silence. The hard, clean stop, like a door closing from the inside. She opened a new document and began to write, not a memo, a security warning formal flagged for immediate circulation to the Vale Assembly. She wrote it the way she wrote everything, methodically, without preamble, building the case from the data. She started with the credential packet filed 2 centuries ago during a routine border registration. She moved to the yearly consistency sweeps, 214 confirmations of a claim the system had never read. She documented Meridian's activation sequence, the authentication mechanism, the legal logic that turned the compact's own procedural law into a lock. She wrote for 4 hours without stopping. At the top of the document, in the field reserved for threat classification, she did not write developmental species or low-tier engagement or any of the categories Earth had previously occupied in Vale records. She wrote unclassified persistent presence, review pending. In secondary filing Bay 14, DeHal had not moved from his desk in 6 hours. His terminal still showed the counterclaim on the secondary display. His primary screen had a live feed from the director's office showing the status of the 14-sector mainframes, still locked, all 14, the same document on every screen. He had watched 3 separate technical teams attempt overrides. He had watched all 3 fail in the same way, with the same polite notification in the same clean font. At 14:22, he did something he had never done in 14 years of service. He looked up the original registry entry for the Endurance, not the reclassification, the original, filed by Earth 2 centuries ago in the standard format with the standard supporting documentation. A colony ship, 42 crew members, destination, the contested rim. He read the roster. It was a plain list, names, roles, certifications. He read it the way he read everything, efficiently, without particular attention. He was almost at the bottom when something stopped him. 3rd row, a name, Acer Y Systems Architecture, lead credentials. He looked at the authentication source on the counterclaim, the credential keys. He pulled the border registration credential packet, the issuing officer's code, recorded at the time of issue. He cross-referenced it with the vessel's crew manifest. The person who had received the credential packet on behalf of the Endurance 2 centuries ago was the same person listed in the 3rd row of the roster. Acer Y. DeHal sat with this for a long time. He thought about a woman in the lower hull of a ship that was about to go dark, with a credential packet that had an expiry date and a network access window. He thought about what a systems architect would do with a network access window and 6 months, and the certain knowledge that no one was coming to help. He thought she knew exactly what the silence would look like. She knew what the compact would eventually do. And she did not fight it, and she did not beg, and she did not leave a warning or a threat or any trace of what she had built. She had just filed it. DeHal looked at the amber authentication stamp on his screen. He looked at it for a long time. Then, very quietly, as if he were saying it to the room rather than to himself, "How long has she been in our system?" No one answered. The 14-sector mainframes kept running their frozen displays. The compliance window stood at 61 hours and 43 minutes remaining. The High Directorate did not respond in the first hour. They did not respond in the second hour either, which DeHal noted because he had nothing else to do but watch the clock on his secondary display and the frozen document on his primary screen, and the live feed from the director's office showing all 14-sector mainframes still locked. At 16:00, the Directorate's senior legal counsel transmitted a formal inquiry to Earth's outer administrative relay asking for the credentials and authority of the individual who had signed the procedural addendum. The inquiry used the correct diplomatic channel, the correct formatting codes, and the correct official language. No one on Earth responded. At 17:30, a technical team from the Compact's Central Infrastructure Division attempted to physically isolate Sector 14's mainframe from the broader network, cutting it off so they could reset the node independently. The isolation procedure required a physical authorization key from the Director of Salvage Compliance and took 40 minutes to execute. When the node came back online, it pulled the document from the network's shared registry log and displayed it again immediately. The network carried the claim. Cutting off one terminal did not remove it from the network. The technical team lead filed a report that was 2 sentences long. The document exists inside the registry layer, not at the terminal level. There is no terminal-side fix. Arath Vorselen read the report. She forwarded it to the Directorate without comment. At 19:00, the compliance window stood at 45 hours remaining. At 23:00, it stood at 41 hours. DeHal went home at some point in between. He was not sure exactly when. He ate something he did not remember eating, slept for a few hours in the way that people sleep when their body insists and their mind is still running, and was back at his desk before the building's morning shift arrived. He had brought the printed roster with him. He set it on the desk beside the terminal, folded open to the third page, the list of 42 names. Acer Y Systems Architecture, lead credentials. He thought about the credential packet again. He thought about the board registration process. He knew it well. He had processed hundreds of them. The standard packet took 3 days to issue. It contained access keys for the network's filing interface and the registry layer. It was designed for temporary use and expired automatically. She had received that packet in the last days before the Endurance went dark. She had used it, in the 6 months before the Silence, to build something that had just locked every mainframe in the Compact's primary compliance network. Not with a weapon, not with an attack, with a document. With their own lot. At 36:00 into the window, 12 hours before the deadline, the Compact's High Directorate convened a full session. Hal was not in the room. He received the summary transmission 40 minutes afterward. It was brief. The session had considered 3 positions. First, contest the claim on procedural grounds. This had been discarded because the Compact's own legal division had confirmed that no procedural grounds existed. The authentication was valid. The priority was valid. The filing predated the reclassification, and the protocol blocking override was the Compact's own protocol operating exactly as designed. Second, treat the activation of Meridian as an act of aggression and respond accordingly. This had been discarded because Meridian had not damaged anything, erased anything, or harmed any person. It had filed a document. Filing a document did not meet the legal threshold for an act of aggression under 3,000 years of Compact precedent. Third, comply. The session had voted. The result was not included in the summary. But at hour 61, on the second day after the compliance window opened, at 09:08 Compact Standard Time, the High Director of the Arathi Compact applied his authorization key to the Endurance's registry entry. The status field changed from abandoned salvage, no recognized claim, back to active sovereign flag, Earth Registry. 6 seconds later, across all 14 sector mainframes simultaneously, the frozen displays cleared. The counterclaim document withdrew from every screen in the compliance network without leaving a trace in the active file queue. Hal's primary terminal returned to its normal interface, showing his pending batch for the morning. His secondary display returned to the reference document he had been using before 09:14 the previous morning. The registry log would later show a gap of 2 days and 3 hours in which the compliance network had operated in partial lockdown status. The cause would be listed, in the official incident report, as internal document processing anomaly, resolved, no source identified. Because they looked for a technical source, they looked in the code layers in the network architecture in the terminal firmware. They did not look in the crew manifest of a colony ship that had gone dark 214 years ago. On Earth, Osai's terminal chimed a second time. It was a softer tone than the first. Acer had designed the confirmation notification differently from the activation alert, lower and shorter, the kind of sound that does not startle. Osai looked at the screen. A single new line had appeared beneath the active status indicator. Meridian Dormant. She sat with that for a moment. The fluorescent lights hummed at their 2 frequencies. The ozone smell from the cooling rigs was exactly as it had always been. She did the thing she had been planning to do for 14 years, ever since she first read the archival log and understood what it contained. She opened the master project record, a plain file, unindexed, stored on the same air-gapped drive as Acer's entries. She typed a single line in the notes field. Claim restored. Meridian returned to dormancy per terms. Project closed. She saved the file. She powered down the terminal. The screen went dark, and for the first time in 14 years, the basement office had no light source except the 2 fluorescent bars humming overhead. She reached into the drawer on the right side of her desk and pulled out the walnut frame. The photograph was old, not degraded, because she had kept it in the dark and the dry and the cold, but old in the way that things go old when they have been held carefully for a long time. The 42 faces looked back at her in the flat overhead light. She found the third row without having to count, second from the left, the woman with the short natural hair who was looking slightly past the camera, as though she had heard something just outside the frame. She had. Ose understood that now, in a way she had not on the first day, had not even fully understood until this moment. Acer had not looked past the camera because she was distracted. She had looked past it because she was listening for the thing she was about to build toward, the door she was about to close from the inside. Osai rested her finger on the glass over Acer's face. She did not say anything. After a moment, she placed the frame back in the drawer and closed it. She pulled on her coat, picked up her bag, and signed the master project record permanently closed. 3 days later, Councillor Resch of the Vale Observers stood before the Vale Assembly's full session and delivered the contents of her 42-page security warning in person. She had not planned to deliver it in person. She had planned to submit it through the standard documentary channel, where it would be read by staff, summarized, and distributed to the relevant committee members in due course. She changed her mind at 14:00 on the second day when she confirmed that the compact had complied. Meridian had withdrawn exactly as stated, and the compact's official incident report had classified the event as a processing anomaly. A processing anomaly. She stood at the assembly lectern without notes. She had read the 42 pages enough times that she did not need them, and she spoke for 37 minutes. She walked through the credential packet. She walked through the dormancy period. She walked through the legal mechanism, the way the compact's own procedural code had been used as both the lock and the key. She walked through the 7-sentence message, the compliance window, and the exact, immediate withdrawal of Meridian at the moment the sovereign flag was restored. She did not editorialize. She did not raise her voice. She presented the sequence of events the way a person presents evidence when the evidence is sufficient by itself. At the end, she said this: 214 years ago, a dying woman put a lock on the door of the most trusted institution in the known galaxy, and she told no one. That is not a civilization that has given up. That is a civilization that is waiting for you to make a mistake. The assembly was quiet for a long time after she finished. The motion to reclassify Earth from all existing developmental categories passed without objection. The new designation, Unclassified Persistent Presence, review pending, was entered into the Vale record at 1644. It sat alongside the updated notation that no active diplomatic contact with Earth had been made, that no Earth representative had attended the session, and that Earth had not, as of the filing date, acknowledged any awareness of the reclassification. Resch added one line to the filing in the notes field before she submitted it. They did not need to be in the room. In secondary filing Bay 14, De Haal's morning queue was moving again. He processed 17 entries before his next break. They went quickly, the way things go quickly when they are routine: a ship here, an abandoned outpost there, a colony claim that had lapsed, a registration that needed updating. He appended his authorization key to each one, the way he had done 10,000 times before. He got to the end of the batch. The queue showed clear. He looked at the empty display for a moment. Then he picked up the printed raster he had brought from home and put it in his desk drawer without looking at it again. He did not file a report about the Endurance. There was nothing to file. The incident record listed a processing anomaly resolved. The registry showed an active sovereign flag for a vessel that had been dark for 2 centuries and was presumably still dark, somewhere in the rim, crewed by 42 people who had been dead for 200 years. He keyed the next batch. The morning queue filled with new entries. He did not check whether any of them had passed through compact border registration in the last few centuries. He had not thought to look for that before. He thought to look for it now. Earth's scrapped colony ship had been dormant for centuries. The Empire's fleet never came back.